Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the City of Lake Forest Park City Council regular meeting, business meeting for Thursday, February 22nd to order. And starting out first, we're going to have the Pledge of Allegiance. And because I'm losing my voice, I've asked Councilmember Gouin to lead us. Thank you, Councilmember.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Everybody, do I hear a motion for adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any nays? The ayes have it. Thank you, council. And with that, we're going to move on to public comment. Requisite language I need to read here. This portion of the agenda is set aside for the public to address the council on agenda items or any other topic the council might have, excuse me, purview or control over. If the comments are of a nature that the council does not have influence or control over, then the mayor may request the speaker suspend their comments. The council may direct staff to follow up on items brought by the public. Comments are limited to a 3-minute time limit. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that. All right, and we have Sarah Phillips. Would you like to join us? Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Sarah Phillips. I live at 18533 26th Avenue Northeast in Lake Forest Park. I'm also the chair of the Climate Action Committee, and I just wanted to invite you to our new book club. Well, it's not new. This is our second book. It's called Dear Human, and it's poetry that came out of the 5th climate assessment. And I also want to let you know that we're thinking in conjunction with Third Place Commons and with the 20th anniversary of Octavia Butler, that we'll read the Parable of the Sower, the 20th anniversary of that book, which is set in 2024. So think about that, put that on your reading list too. So, but the book club is meeting at the 29th of February in the Third Place Commons at 5:30. And the good news about a poetry book is you really don't have to read the whole thing. Just pick out one. Thank you.
Fair enough. Thank you, Sarah. Are there any other members of the public in the chambers that would like to make comment at this time? Matt, do we have anyone online?
If you want to address the council, please use the raise hand function. Doesn't look like it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'll close public comment. Thank you, everybody. And with that, we're moving on to proclamations. We have a proclamation recognizing March as Women's History Month, and Deputy Mayor Bodie has been gracious enough to volunteer to read this to us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whereas American women of every race, class, and ethnic background have made historic contributions to the growth and strength of our nation in countless recorded and unrecorded ways. And whereas American women have played and continue to play critical economic, cultural, and social roles in every sphere of life of the nation by constituting a significant portion of the labor force, working inside and outside of the home. And whereas American women have played a unique role throughout the history of the nation by providing the majority of the volunteer labor force of the nation. And whereas American women were particularly important in the establishment of early charitable, philanthropic, and cultural institutions in our nation. And whereas American women of every race, class, and ethnic background served as early leaders in the forefront of every major progressive social change movement. And whereas American women have served our country courageously in the military, and whereas American women have been leaders not only in securing their own rights of suffrage and equal opportunity, but also in the abolitionist movement, the emancipation movement, the industrial labor movement, the civil rights movement, and other movements, especially the peace movement, which create a more fair and just society for all. And whereas, despite these contributions, the role of American women in history has been consistently overlooked and undervalued in the literature, teaching, and study of American history. Now, therefore, the mayor and city council of the city of Lake Forest Park do hereby proclaim March 2024 as Women's History Month in the city of Lake Forest Park. and we urge all citizens to join in the special observance. Signed this 22nd day of February, 2024, Tom French, Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bodie. Appreciate that. With that, we get to move on to the fun part of the evening. Chief, you have the floor, bringing in a new officer as well as we have a promotion.
Yes,
Thank you.
it'll be exciting stuff. So thank you, council and mayor and community and all the people that showed up, friends and family, and for the officers working tonight as well. So I'm going to start, I believe it is with, you did get the pleasure of meeting our two officers earlier, Officer Montague and Officer Alcine. Officer Montague is doing a fantastic job. Officer Alcine has actually been deployed overseas, so hopefully we get him back towards the end of the year. So, and then we get the pleasure of a new officer here, Samantha Gouin, that graduated from the academy at the end of January, and then a promotion with one of our officers to sergeant. And then we have two other officers down the road in a few months that we'll get to present as well. So recruit Samantha Gouin, if you want to come on up here. Soon to be Officer Gouin. She has proven to be very dedicated to the pursuit of becoming law enforcement officer. As a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, Samantha brings a strong sense of discipline and dedication to everything she pursues. Her professional journey has been marked by a series of impactful roles showcasing her versatility and leadership abilities, from her time as a security corporal at the Kemper Development Company to her role as a shift coordinator and supervisor at Praetorian Detective Agency. Samantha has consistently demonstrated her ability to thrive in demanding environments, evidenced by her tenure as a key holder at the Mariners team store. Samantha earned her associate's degree at North Seattle College and pursued a certification at the National Personal Training Institute, reflecting her passion for health and wellness. Outside of her professional pursuits, Samantha finds joy in her marriage to her wife, Bryce, who is here, and whom she shares a love for travel, adventure, and culinary exploration. Despite her busy schedule, Samantha prioritizes physical activity as a means of maintaining balance and vitality in her life. Whether she's weightlifting, hiking, biking, running, paddleboarding, or enjoying leisurely walks with her beloved 14-year-old pitty, Ricky, Samantha embraces every opportunity to stay active and engaged. Samantha is thrilled to embark on her latest adventure as a member of the Lake Forest Park Police Department and contribute to the well-being of our community. With her unwavering dedication and passion for service, Samantha is poised to make a meaningful impact wherever she goes. And congratulations on becoming the latest Lake Forest Park Police Officer, and good luck. So if you'd like to come up here, Judge, please have a formal swearing in here. How about right here on the side, and then.
All right, will you raise your right hand? I, Samantha Gouin, having been duly appointed as a police officer for the city of Lake Forest Park, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully and impartially perform the duties of the office as prescribed by law and to the best of my ability, and that I will support and maintain the ordinances of the city of Lake Forest Park and the laws and constitution of the state of Washington and the United States of America. Congratulations.
I'm officially going to give her ID that was going from police recruit to police officer. Congratulations. So now she's going to start off on her few months of training, field training, and then get released. All right.
Congratulations.
All right, let's have Officer Jerome Walker, soon to be Sergeant Jerome
Wow.
Walker. So Jerome is a dedicated law enforcement professional with over 16 years of service. Born and raised in Gig Harbor, Jerome graduated from Peninsula High School, later earning his Associates of Arts degree from Tacoma Community College, and then going on to graduate with a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology, specializing in crime and deviance from Pacific Lutheran University. During his college years, Jerome gained valuable experience working at U.S. probation in both Seattle and Tacoma federal offices. Jerome commenced his law enforcement journey with King County Sheriff's Office before transitioning to the Lake Forest Park Police Department, where he made a significant impact over the years. Jerome has been a field training officer, teaching many of our officers over the years. Jerome has been the traffic officer for the last 6 years, serving up lots of traffic infraction tickets, investigating collision cases. With a passion for service and community engagement, Jerome is not only committed to his duties within the department, but also actively involved in various leadership roles. He currently serves as the Guild President and is the president and co-founder of the North Sound Police Foundation, demonstrating his commitment to supporting law enforcement efforts beyond his daily responsibilities. In recognition of his outstanding contributions, Jerome was honored as Office of the Year in 2021, a testament to his exemplary dedication and service. Outside of his professional endeavors, Jerome finds joy and fulfillment in family life, sharing time with his wife and 3 daughters, twins as well. Their involvement in gymnastic competitions keep them actively engaged and bonded as a family union. Jerome's unwavering dedication to law enforcement and the community he serves makes him an invaluable asset to the Lake Forest Park Police Department, embodying the principles of excellence, integrity, and service. So congratulations on becoming the next sergeant and the next level of leadership to our PD and the community. And I know Sergeant Walker, you'll make us proud. We'll have the judge do a.
Swear you can. Yes, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right, raise your right hand. I, Jerome Walker,
I, Jerome Walker,
having been duly appointed as police sergeant,
have,
having
Say-
been
have-
duly appointed
having been duly appointed as police sergeant
for the city of Lake Forest Park,
for the city of Lake Forest Park,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully and impartially
I will faithfully and impartially
perform the duties of the office
perform the duties of the office
as prescribed by law
as prescribed by law
and to the best of my ability,
and to the best of my ability,
that I will support and maintain
that I will support and maintain
the ordinances of the city of Lake Forest Park
the ordinances of the city of Lake Forest Park
and the laws and constitution
and the laws and constitution
of the state of
of
Washington
the state of Washington.
and the United States of
and the
America.
United States of America.
Congratulations.
All right, congratulations.
Nice
Wait,
face,
no.
this is great.
Oh,
There we go.
thank you.
All right. Well, Sure. All right, and Sam, you want to come up here or we'll get a picture of council?
You want us to come down or you want us to?
What do you want to do?
I think they're coming down.
Yep.
You know, they're enthusiastic.
I mean, I'm gonna grab the photos. Oh, wow. Check me out here. Okay, Jerome and Sam.
All right.
All right.
That's one of the fun parts.
Yeah, yeah. Best part of the night.
I know.
All right. And with that, we're moving on to, well, this is actually gonna be a great part of the night too. Mr. Hoffman has the Urban Forest Ecosystems Services and Values Report. Welcome, Mark.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Mark Hoffman. I'm the new Community Development Director here at the City of Lake Forest Park, first time at the podium. Just to introduce this presentation for you, the DCG Watershed has performed a report that's in your packet. You also have the presentation slides in your packet. Two members of DCG, Kim Frappier and Sam Payne, are here tonight to do the presentation. And we also have an opportunity for Doug Sprugel of the Tree Board to make himself available for questions or a short statement. So with that, I'll introduce Kim.
Thank you, Mark.
Good evening, council members. Thank you so much for having us tonight. As Mark was saying, my name is Kim Frappier. I'm an urban forester and environmental planner with DCG Watershed, and I'm here with my colleague Sam Payne, who is an ecologist and certified arborist. DCG Watershed is formerly known as the Watershed Company, and we provide a suite of urban forestry, natural resource assessment, land use and environmental planning services, as well as civil, structural, and marine engineering services. We work with both private and public landowners to help them manage their natural resources and infrastructure projects. We are pleased to join you tonight to present an overview of the Urban Forest Ecosystem Services and Values Report, which provides a synthesis of the iTree urban forestry study that we conducted from 2022 to 2023. So for our presentation tonight, we are providing an overview of the project objectives, the methods that we used for the study. We're going to also highlight key results pertaining to urban forest structure and ecosystem service benefits that the forest provides. And lastly, we're going to touch briefly on topics that were raised in the discussion portion of the report. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go into great depth, but we are at least going to give you the Cliff Notes version for this evening. So I know that many of you are familiar with this project, and so for some, it's going to be a review. The project objectives for the study were to conduct a citywide tree inventory using both GIS as well as a randomized plot sampling methodology. The goal was to describe the urban forest attributes and structure, such as species and tree size distribution, with a particular focus on the presence of large trees, looking at both diameter and height. We also sought to characterize what we call functional analysis of the forest or the ecosystem services. So looking at what are the services the forest is providing us and quantifying it, looking at pollution removal, avoided runoff, carbon sequestration, and storage. Another objective and benefit of the project is that we engaged and educated landowners who participated in the study in urban forest management efforts made by the city. And lastly, there was a goal to compare at a broad scale the results of this study with the one that was conducted in 2010 by the Tree Board, which was similar to this one. So as I mentioned before, this study utilized iTree Eco, which is a software application that is part of a larger peer-reviewed suite of software that is provided by the USDA Forest Service. The study was designed to collect forest attributes at the city scale using randomized plot-based sampling protocol. We collected data from 100 plots stratified into 3 categories. So essentially the plots were broken up based on characteristics, 1 being town center, 2 being sites that were 1/4 acre or less, and the 3rd being 1/4 acre or greater. So most of the plots were located on private property, which required obtaining landowner permission in order to conduct data collection. We originally sought to collect data from all of the original plots from the 2010 study, but this was not feasible. We quickly learned because not all of the landowners wanted to continue to provide permission and participate in the study. And so we did end up having to get about 50 additional plots. I think it was 46 exactly, in order to get to the 100 plots that we were aiming for. And this is a common struggle with these studies when we're trying to collect data on private property. So for each plot, we collected information on, well, the location, canopy cover, shrub cover, the underlying land use, as well as ground cover. For each tree that was rooted within the plot, we collected specific tree data such as diameter, height, species, crown condition, crown size. And one thing that I realized I did not mention on this slide is that we also collected measurements on the distance from specified trees to built infrastructure in the plot. Because one of the things that we look at when we're looking at ecosystem service benefits is a measure of the benefit that those trees provide in the built environment, such as shade and energy cost savings. And so that was actually a variable that we needed to collect data for in order to use in the software model. So to speak more specifically to the GIS methods used in the study, I'm now going to hand the presentation over to Sam.
All right, thank you, Kim. Let's go to the next slide for that. So to get at one of the questions we were looking at was really about whether large trees in Lake Forest Park are being retained. It was a question that we couldn't really answer with the iTree analysis. And for that, we turned to an independent LiDAR-based analysis that we did here for a canopy height model. So to get at that, we looked at data from 2016 and 2021 to evaluate tree heights for pretty much all the trees in Lake Forest Park that could be identified with LiDAR data. So on the left here is just a graphic that shows what that looks like, a screenshot of, all those black dots are tree centers. The heat map shows elevations of LiDAR. So we have yellow is the highest, green, and then the turquoise color is lower. And with that, we'll get to the methods, or sorry, to the results section. And since this is such a brief presentation, there's a lot of really interesting results that we have in the report here that we won't be able to talk about today, just because we're trying to condense this down into a 10 or 15-minute presentation. So we'll go through this pretty quickly. There are an estimated 297,000 trees in Lake Forest Park. That's a canopy coverage of about 50.6%. This breaks down by stratum to be 57% in the large residential stratum, 31% in the small residential stratum, and 13% in the town center. And that's shown there on the graph on the left. So species composition in Lake Forest Park is about 63% native. And if we look at this chart on the right, it shows a pie chart of the most common trees in the city. So we've got Douglas fir, big leaf maple, western red cedar near the top. These are some of our most common large native trees. 63% is actually comparatively a really high number compared to some other neighboring cities. So this is a good thing to see. The other thing that we saw is that there is 19% of the composition is weeds of concern, as identified by the King County Noxious Weed Board. So that's a little on the high end. On this list here, some of the trees in that category are the English holly, the cherry laurel, and the sweet cherry. Only actually less than 1% are actually designated as noxious weeds. The only one that was found in the study is English hawthorn. So that particular part is doing well. This slide gets at species tree diversity. And it's measured in this case using species richness. Species richness is the number of species in a particular unit of area. In this case, we have two different scales that it's looking at. In the light green column on the chart, we see species richness at the city scale. And in this case, the small residential stratum actually has more diversity or more species richness than the large residential stratum or the town center. We see a little bit of a different relationship when we look at it at the plot level, or actually the per acre level scale, where the large residential has more species richness than small residential. And this is probably due to the fact that our native tree diversity that we see in our, let's say that the large residential stratum has more native tree species, and it's an assemblage that is kind of consistent across the landscape, but it is diverse at the local scale compared to the small residential stratum has a lot of ornamental trees, a lot of mixture of introduced things mixed in. So there's variety between the plots that we don't see as much as the large residential. Another way that we measure trees is through DBH, or diameter at breast height. This is just the width of a tree at breast height. So here we have a histogram of DBH classes. This can be classified as a youthful tree population because we have 71% of the trees are on the younger end, smaller than 12 inches DBH. 10% of the trees are larger than 24 inches DBH. And if we compare this to the prior study, there appears to be a trend of a larger proportion of larger trees now than we saw previously. So that's a good thing to see. Although I would caveat in ascertaining trends in this study that because of the study design, there wasn't always the ability to get statistically significant data for this. So we'll keep that in mind. Here are the results of the canopy height model. In the dark green column, we have the 2021 data. In the light green column, we have 2016. And what we're really looking for in this part of the study is the larger trees. So if we look on the right side of the graph, we see those with heights greater than 135 feet are increasing in the last 5 years. So if we're trying to answer the question of whether the largest trees are being retained, it appears that the answer is yes. Or at least that trees that are smaller are aging into the larger sizes at a greater rate than they're being lost. So that's another good sign that we like to see there. Okay, with this, we'll move from forest structure to ecosystem benefits. The first one we have here is air quality. So trees improve air quality by absorbing and intercepting pollutants. The estimated benefit of trees in Lake Forest Park for this function is $2.55 million per year. On the left, there's just a chart of 6 common pollutants shown the monthly pollution removal by trees in Lake Forest Park. These pollutants are carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, PM10, PM2.5, and sulfur dioxide. You might notice the big spike of PM10. That's due to the smoky season when the data was obtained. So it does a lot more of that function during that period of the year. Carbon storage benefits are estimated about $450,000 per year. And because they accumulate carbon over many years, the total carbon storage benefit is estimated at about $16.6 million. That's a bit of a typo. It's not per year. That's total for the urban forest there. In carbon storage, as a dollar amount here is a benefit of the mitigated cost of basically climate-related economic impacts. And on the previous slide, the The air pollution number was a measure of reduced medical costs associated with disease and illness that come from airborne pollutants. The annual stormwater benefit is also estimated at $450,000 per year. Trees reduce the burden of cities to provide stormwater facilities such as stormwater ponds and bioswales. This might be a good time just to point out the graph here, how the large residential stratum really has a disproportionate effect or provides disproportionately large amount of benefits compared to the rest of the city. This is, I mean, in part because that stratum is just physically larger than the other stratums, and this one's not normalized for area, but because it has the greatest density and leaf area, it just it provides most of those benefits comparatively. And town center doesn't just show up on this list because it is too small. So it's kind of a rounding error. It would be smaller than that gray line at the bottom. When we put all those together, we get about $4 million, $4,092,742 to be exact, as an estimated annual annual economic value that trees provide. And I would just note that these are only the specific benefits that iTree assesses for economic benefits, but there's a lot of other intrinsic values that trees provide that are difficult to quantify. Wildlife habitat being one of them. I won't go into those details, but there's a lot of other values. And just the high value of trees in general here, as pointed out here, kind of identify a need for policy and management to consider in way, what is lost when trees are removed. So I'll go through the pests and pathogens section just really quickly in one slide. The iTree analysis does provide a susceptibility matrix for each tree species to each of the common pathogens, and it quantifies the potential economic impacts that they can have if they do the expected damage to those trees. This is useful because it can help inform a cost-benefit analysis on whether or not to manage those particular pests or not. In a lot of cases, they don't need to be. In some cases, they can. It's also good to keep in track of emerging threats, such as the emerald ash borer shown here on the left. This is an insect which was recently found in the region and is expected to have some pretty widespread damage to the ash tree genus. With that, I will hand the presentation back to Kim for the next section.
Okay, thanks, Sam. So essentially, overall, the results of the iTree study and the canopy height model can provide some insight into current conditions and inform some management priorities moving forward for the city. And as Sam mentioned, the results suggest that we're seeing a net increase in canopy cover and tree density over the last 10 years, which we're not seeing in very many cities in the region. So that was a positive outcome to see. And Lake Forest Park, like other cities in the region, is faced with the task of managing a resilient, healthy, regenerative urban forest for its community. And there are a number of management issues, challenges, opportunities that I know that the tree board has been thinking about, and these are things that we touched briefly on in the report. The focus of this report was really on presenting the data and describing the results and not a complete urban forest management plan. So I would encourage you to take these ideas forward into the next phase of your management and into this work. Some of the top issues that we discussed with the tree board included climate adaptation and resilience. As many of us know, Western Washington continues to experience increasingly hotter and drier summers, and during the growing season, increased winter precipitation and severity of storms, and this exacerbates stressors on existing tree species in the urban forest. Our trees both are impacted by climate change, but also help to mitigate it. And that is the challenge, is ensuring that we have a healthy urban forest that can respond to the changes in climate that we're seeing. The second issue that has been a thread throughout this entire project is the need to protect our significant and large diameter trees, because they are, although having a diversity of ages and sizes in the urban forest is critical for regeneration and for health, our large trees are the workhorses and providing a lot of ecosystem service benefits in the community. And so we want to continue to protect those. Invasive species management is a topic that really rose to the top. We did not do a comprehensive assessment of the presence of and the impact of English ivy in the plots. As it was present as a ground cover, or, we were accounting for it. But we know from our work that English ivy and Himalayan and other invasive species like Himalayan blackberry definitely have a significant impact on tree canopy integrity, forest regeneration, and ecological diversity. And so this is an important management issue that the tree board is very aware of. And so, with that, we encourage you to take the data that we have collected through this study and bring it forward in your urban forest management activities. We are happy to answer any questions that you have about the study. There's a lot more detail in this, a little light reading for you for the rest of the week. And I know that Doug Sprugel from the tree board also wants to share some words from the tree board. And then I thought we could just open it up to questions after that.
Doug, would you like to join us? Welcome.
So I was asked to just very briefly say how we plan to use this report. I will do it very quickly. One thing we're going to do, of course, is put it on the city website, so anybody who wants to read about our forest can do it. I'm pretty sure the Climate Action Committee is going to be interested in the information about carbon sequestration. But we'll make it available to as many people as possible. Hopefully we can clean up the website a little so it can be found. It's pretty hard to find the current report for project for the tree board for this year. Second thing we'll do is that one of the things the tree board does is publicizes the value of our trees. We put out things in the LFP e-news and so forth. We have handouts at the Green Fair. This will give us much more concrete data to put in that. So for example, instead of saying, oh, trees are wonderful, they take pollutants out of the air, they say, our trees take out 100 tons of pollutants every year. They take CO2, they take 2,500 tons of carbon out of the air every year. So we can punch up our publicity. The third thing we're going to use it for, again, quickly, and I'm glad this is still up here, is providing quantity.
There you go. You ready?
I can read it. I don't understand. The comment about protection of significant trees, large and significant trees. Some of the members of the council will remember that I think about 2 years ago, the tree board made some recommendations for changes in the city code. And particularly one of the ones we recommended was a change in the level at which we consider trees to be exceptional, which is to get the highest level of protection of anything in the city. And members of the council said appropriately, well, I think we proposed a 36-inch limit. Said, what is that? Is that 2% of the trees or 10% or 0.5% or what? And the answer was, actually, we had the data to do that. We didn't realize it at the time. But by the time we realized what we had, we decided it was easier to wait for this. But we'll be bringing that recommendation again forward. And this time we'll know what number it is. If we're saying 36 inches,
Sure.
We'll say that's 1.4% of the trees in the city, 2.8% of the Douglas firs and things like that. And, it may end up being a range of options, but whatever we provide, we'll be able to use these data to support those options and say what they actually mean. And since they have invasive species management, I want to put a plug in for the ivy removal event that we're doing. Anybody remember what it is?
April 27th.
April 27th. And can you tell them where it is before I forget, since I forget?
Well, we'll be putting information out. It's on, it's on 35th Avenue Northeast, a few blocks that, we'll be moving. Anybody?
Thank you, Mark.
Another one of our responses to one of the recommendations here.
Right.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Doug. Excellent presentation, everyone. Thank you, Tree Board and consultants for all the hard work here. Colleagues, questions for our friends while they're available? Councilmember Riddle.
I have a few questions. I think, one, is this information, are the metrics that you collected something that you can share like with the DNR so they can put it into their larger database? Is it compatible? Do you know?
Well, they are going to be shared with the iTree program to make them publicly available. That they've asked us if we would, and it sounds like the city, has would like us to do that. So we were planning to eventually publish them there. I'm not sure if that would necessarily include the data. Do you know of any DNR? I'm not sure if the DNR.
Get back to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the format of the data collection is a little bit different, but we could certainly find out and get back to you.
Yeah. They're trying to get as much for the state as possible and
We have been asked by the iTree, by USDA Forest Service to share the study, and so
Fantastic.
it will get published on their website and shared nationally. Because they're very interested in sharing the results of the study as well.
awesome. Thank you for doing that. And then I had one quick question about the lawns, and I think it was, this was in your detail, not in your presentation, but I was just curious if you could, you had unmanaged grass and grass, and I was curious what unmanaged grass meant to you. Could that be like just random moss? I don't know. What was that category to you?
Yeah, so the field metric, I think that was in the ground cover category. And that would just be a difference between a lawn is, grassland that is mowed regularly versus an unmanaged grass would be any grass dominated area that's not regularly maintained.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Council, other questions? Yeah, Councilmember Good.
I see that you talked about invasive species. I didn't see, did you find knotweed in your studies?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the invasive species, when you saw those tree presentation part of it, that 19% number, those are specifically invasive trees. So this was a study of trees, and while we did measure cover of different strata below that, such as ground covers and shrubs, we weren't actually recording invasive species cover of those non-tree plants. It's not a part of the iTree model specifically, which is why that wasn't included.
Maybe it should be.
One comment on that, though, that we were reminded as we read, the tree board was reminded as we read this report, that we have, you're probably all aware, we have a tree list of recommended trees. A couple of those species are actually on the King County list of weeds of concern. One is invasive, is actually a noxious weed, and a couple more are weeds of concern. So we're going to clean that up a little bit.
Okay. Thanks for the.
Yeah, English holly and cherry laurel are two species that are weeds of concern. They're not regulated by King County, but they are considered weeds of concern. And I know that in many cities, they're being removed at least from natural areas and discouraged from city tree lists, even though they're widespread in people's hedges and ornamentally used. Yeah.
Councilmember.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for all your hard work, both Watershed and also the Tree Board. One of the goals was to try to do sort of like an apples to apples comparison between this inventory and the 2010. And you sort of mentioned that it was hard to sort of get like a statistical comparison. I was hoping you could just provide a bit more detail on how come it's hard to do that longitudinal study.
Yeah. A large part of that really has to do with the number of plots that we have and sort of the logistics in getting that number of plots to get a level of statistical significance. With the 100 plots that we have, we're looking at an approximate standard error of about 17%. So we could look at the two studies and see these increasing apparent trends. But when the numbers, increase marginally and you have a large standard error, then it's really hard to use that data to really say certainly with statistical significance that is the trend that we're seeing. So that's sort of the reason behind it. If we had 300, 400 plots, maybe that would get us there, but it would be a large effort to make that.
Okay, thank you for that.
And I
Larry,
apologize
if I
for
could add one other thing to that. One of the hopes that I think you were pointing out was to actually remeasure exactly the same plot. But I believe you guys have told me that the plots are sort of indicated, well, it's in this person's yard roughly here. And that's not really, and then you measure every tree within, 17 feet of that, something like that. Anyway, some certain distance of that, but you need to know exactly where it was. And when this is done on a forestry basis, people will put in a permanent marker, say, yeah, we want every tree within 17 feet of this. The descriptions that were in the previous data were not precise enough to really locate those plot centers again. So, and it doesn't really help much if your plot is like 5 feet, is centered 5 feet away. So that was a disappointment, I think, but
Unfortunately.
when I looked at the data, I said, oh yeah, I can see where that's going to be a problem.
I apologize, Larry, you for mispronouncing your name. You may call me Tom Frank. Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Bodie, please.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated it. And I was really pleased to see the ecosystem services benefit calculations, because I do think that we, as a small city with a lot of trees, trying to protect our trees, we still face some skepticism about the value of retaining the trees, and some characterizations that if you try to retain trees in sensitive areas, it's kind of a NIMBY kind of issue, right? And so this is very helpful because it gives us actual information, as opposed to trees are good because they help control pollution. So this is very helpful. And as we are both working on a climate action plan and a new comprehensive plan, I think that in addition to the excellent work by the tree board, we'll have some good information to use in both of those other products. So thank you so much for that.
Yes, Councilmember Fertoni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you all for the wonderful presentation. I'm glad you explained to Councilmember Goldman about that issue with the statistics, because I noticed you're downloading your data from iTreeEco into R. And what does R do? It does statistics. So I was kind of wondering about that myself. So thanks for answering the question. My question is more about the services themselves. I'm thinking that it's a bit incomplete, because trees also serve as noise abatement. Trees also serve as urban heat island effect mitigators. And is there any way to quantify that kind of service?
It's a not it moment.
Well, did you want to give it a go?
I was going to say that within the iTree model, they don't necessarily have an economic measure of noise abatement, although we do know that through many studies that trees and urban forests provide noise abatement. There are also studies that link it to crime prevention and public safety, that we see an increase in the values of homes and properties, that have trees. There are many other benefits that are but they're not captured in the iTree model. So unfortunately, there were some that we couldn't capture, even though we know that they're known benefits. I don't know if I'm getting to your question.
That's kind of what I expected.
Yeah,
But-
I think that gets at it. I mean, I think part of the question was, can you quantify it? And I guess part of the answer is yes, but not necessarily economically. And, there's research going on for that now, but it's not a part of the iTree system at the moment.
Councilmember Lebo is first, and then Deputy Mayor Bodie, please.
Thank you, Mayor French. I very much appreciate the presentation this evening. I found the information very helpful and I think we'll find it very useful. Just a quick question though. I was curious why so many plots were centered on the town center, since it seemed to be rather homogeneous.
I'm sorry, do you mind repeating that? How come there were so few plots in town center?
No, how come there were so many?
There were
Referred
so
to 8 plots at the town center and it seems rather homogeneous.
Yeah, so we did do, in order to have random sampling.
Yeah.
We went through a process where we created a grid and used a computer program to choose where the plots would be located in order to achieve randomness. And so that was how, so we ended up having quite a few still in town center, even though it seemed large compared to the project area.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, most of the plots that we used in this were actually determined from the replicated from the study that was done before us. So we kind of replicated the method that was done previously. But the other thing I would want to say is that when you do a stratified sampling design, that you need a minimum number of samples in each strata. We can look at it and you know, it seems homogeneous to us, but really until you get the data, you don't really have objective information on that. So you need to be able to say that statistically, not just kind of subjectively of how we view it.
Yeah, because it seemed a bit odd to me that disproportionately, for example, the town center seemed to contribute a lot more and than what I would expect for the amount of foliage that's in town center. Just an observation.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that might depend on which specific metric it was. Some of them were on a unit of area and some were on a unit of an absolute value. So that the ones that were normalized to unit area might seem higher.
Okay.
A thought?
One little additional comment on that too. Since I wasn't with the field crews, but I've done a few of these plots myself. The plots in town center didn't take very long. They didn't cost the city very much.
We're good.
There are 2 trees. There you go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Deputy Mayor Bodie.
And one thing I just wanted to add too, I was actually hoping that we would have more plots on public land, you know, and in publicly managed land. And just because of how the plots shook out, we ended up primarily on private land, which I thought was interesting. And we didn't have a lot of control over in that. We could have designed, because we were trying to design, we were designing the study similar to the 2010 sampling protocol. We stayed with that because there was a hope and an expectation that we were going to be able to compare the results. If we were to design it differently moving forward, we could actually pre-stratify the sampling plots and actually have, measure the area within the different stratum that we're looking at. And we could have looked very specifically at public land. We could have potentially handled things a little bit differently on those parcels that had greater impervious surface or like within town center, so there are different ways that you can actually design and stratify the study. But because we were trying to mirror what had been done in 2010, this is where we landed.
Deputy Mayor Bodie.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm just following up on the ecosystem services question. I understand that iTree calculates only certain categories, but if we wanted to assess noise dampening or heat temperature regulation and improvement, is that something that can be done? It's just not with this methodology.
Absolutely. And there are actually studies right now that are underway in Seattle and in other communities where they are specifically doing urban heat island effect studies. And so we can probably point you to those projects if you're interested in exploring them more. But there are some active projects going on right now. I know that the city of Tumwater, which I know quite a ways away, but we're not working on this study with them. But we have other projects going with Tumwater, and they actually just got funding through DNR to do an urban heat island effects study. And so there's also opportunities for the city of Lake Forest Park to go after some grant funding to fund those studies. So something to keep in mind.
Excellent. Always in search of grant funding.
You bet. Councilmember Riddle.
In that vein, I did have one other question related to the stormwater comment and knowing that you guys kind of have an engineering side as well. Have you seen municipalities actually take advantage of the positive effect that trees have on stormwater mitigation and actually putting in code that reduces catchment sizes and stuff? Has communities actually taken advantage of the trees in their codes that way?
Want me to start with that? Yeah, so I would say yes, there are cities that are starting to get creative and to regulate around the co-benefits of stormwater and trees. Now, there's not many because it's fairly new. I mean, I think that I'm hoping I'm going to get this right, but the city of Snoqualmie, is it Snoqualmie? Actually has it is actually developing it, within their regulations. I would like to confirm that for you. But because it is fairly new, but it's on the rise. So I think the answer is yes. And but we don't have a lot of models for it locally, but it's starting.
Thank you. That's fantastic to hear.
Councilmember Tony.
Yeah, thanks again. And one of the sentences in your summary really caught my attention. It's I think it's like this is on the main report, and it's about third bullet point from the bottom. Carbon storage, the total urban forest is valued at $16.6 million, as you said. But this is the part that gets me. And the replacement value is estimated at 531 million, $500 million worth of asset right there. So let's say some entity, we're going to take down 300 trees, which for the sake of argument is about 0.1% of the number of trees that you counted in Lake Forest Park. Now, I would be tempted to charge that entity $500,000. Have you heard of a municipality or other agency that has turned around and said to that entity, yeah, you owe us for the trees? You could treat the question as rhetorical if you like.
I apologize. Would you mind repeating the question? I was writing down my comment,
Sure.
so I didn't lose track of Councilmember Riddle's request.
That's fair. You're done. You're writing down.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay.
So go ahead.
Yeah,
So
I just wanted to mention that in the summary, you say that the replacement value of the trees is estimated at $531 million. And so I was posing a hypothetical in which some entity takes down 0.1% of the trees in the city. And I don't know if you've heard of a case of a municipality or other agency that then turned around and charged that entity about, let's say, $500,000 for the loss of services of the trees.
okay, so you're asking, have municipalities turned around and asked for the replacement value of those trees?
Yes.
So this is interesting because I have not seen this very widespread. Typically, what we see regulated and in, city tree code is that the replacement value is usually based on the market, wholesale rate, for the actual cost of the tree, and perhaps some maintenance, the cost of installation, things that are very easy to quantify and pass on. We actually did recently have in our arboriculture consulting work, we actually were asked by a municipality to use iTree to calculate the value of the trees and the service benefits. So within the suite of iTree tools, they actually they have a number of different types of software. And one of them is you can actually just do the calculations for an individual tree and even for the canopy cover on one parcel. And so we recently did have a client come to us and say, we would like you to quantify not only the market value of this tree and the cost for maintenance, but what's the replacement value in ecosystem services? And they pass that on to the landowner. And so it's not very common. I think, that municipalities are doing that, but it is something that you could feasibly do. So. And, yeah.
Colleagues, any other follow-up? Yes.
Sorry to keep
No.
hogging this. Okay, thank you. So I have a question for Mr. Sprugel. And I've been the recipient of a lot of great reports from Councilmember Goldman about the work of the committee, and really appreciate the work that the tree board does on all this coordinating with the inventory and all this kind of stuff. I did have one question, which was Councilmember Goldman at one point mentioned that you all were developing a letter that new homeowners in Lake Forest Park would get about the values that we hold for the environment. And I know that you've made progress in it, but will this tree inventory help you flesh out that report and really tell people down to almost like the dollar level what basically the value that we hold for these trees in this community?
I'm not writing the letter, so I don't really know the answer to the question. We've had quite a bit of turnover in the part of we've had a complete turnover in the part of the tree board that does that kind of thing, that works with the public outreach kind of thing.
I'm writing a letter, and yes.
Was that all of your questions?
That was my question.
Makes it easy. Yeah, Councilmember Riddle.
For my colleague, iTree does have a tool now where you can put in like a specific tree on your property and give it the information, and it will tell you, like, my cedar absorbs enough stormwater to fill 5,985 bathtubs. And so it puts it in kind of a accessible way. And it also gives you, I don't know if it gives you dollar amount, but it does give you a lot of that information. So I could share that link with the council.
So we could do that for say 300 trees.
We possibly could use that for 300 trees.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, you've already discovered that this is open source and available to the public. This is free software that USDA Forest Service continues to improve and update through peer-reviewed work. They work closely with Davey Tree Company, Arbor Day Foundation, ISA, and other organizations to continually update the software and the model. And so, and they do make it open to the public. So it's.
Thank you. Any other last comments? I just would say, I've been waiting for this for quite some time because I was concerned we were falling behind, and having been through all the iterations of the tree ordinance over more than, well, I guess over a decade. There's a lot of work still to be done, clearly, but we're not falling behind, which we were kind of concerned we might have been. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion continuing and the great work that the tree board is doing, because this is a narrative that we can take the data and really describe it to the community and show that there's value in these types of protections that we're doing, as difficult as sometimes it might be. So thank you all so much for your work and for the tree board. Sure appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, with that, we're moving on to Mr. Hoffman again is joining us. The comprehensive plan periodic update overview and timeline. And I understand that he has only 45 slides. He didn't rise to the bait. 45 slides, right, Mark?
The topic deserves that, yeah.
Yes, it does.
Thank you again, Mark Hoffman, Community Development Director. This next presentation is much broader by its very name. It's comprehensive. So what I tried to do tonight is honor the request, and that is give a presentation that's an overview, talks about the process, but mostly gives you a status. So I wanted to start very broad, but do it briefly and with not a whole lot of words, not a whole lot of slides. It's a challenge. I hope that I've done that. So that's what our intent is to convey tonight. Generally, it's a 2-year process. We're about halfway through. It's an important year. And the discussion, I want to leave as much time for discussion tonight because it also informs where we go next week and the week after and the week after. But I'll dive into it. The first thing I want to do is convey 5 things and focus on those. reserve time for discussion and questions. To start in the broadest sense, I've, in my own words or stealing words, I've tried to condense what is a comprehensive plan and its purpose and its elements. And then some background on the Growth Management Act without using too many acronyms tonight, and the required periodic update, which is the effort that we're doing. And then some good news, talk about some grants that we've received for this effort to offset the burden from Department of Commerce. Get to the key slide, which is where are we at with Planning Commission, and then some wordiness there to talk about outreach, some examples. The prior topic is a great example for that slide when we get there, and then some policy framework, and then open to any questions or comments or direction. So the first attempt is, what is a comprehensive plan? And we learned very early in graduate school to always say it's not a binder collecting dust on a shelf. That said, it's everyone's document, every department at the city council, the planning commission, and it informs future decision-making at all levels. A lot of people view it as land use, zoning. It's much more than that. It consists of various elements or chapters that deal with all the issues, both at the state level, the county level, and the local level. This 2-year effort is a collective effort to look at all those issues so that you can evaluate, analyze, and judge the cumulative impacts, let's say, of all those topics. Some are required and some are optional under the Growth Management Act. Lake Forest Park has in the past incorporated many, if not most of the key optional elements. And I have them listed. Some you'll be very aware of and some not so much, but land use, housing, capital facilities, utilities, transportation, and a new one, climate. In the last legislative session, they passed a bill requiring a mandatory element for climate change and resilience. Many municipalities in King County, or the 4 counties in the Seattle metro area, already had their periodic updates underway. So it wasn't deemed fair to stop or restart that process. So for King County, for example, that climate element is not mandatory until 2029. But we'll talk further about that. Some of the optional elements, you'll see the names as they appear in the comprehensive plan right now, and the ones with the asterisks are actually mandatory, but they're not funded in the past, and so they're treated as optional. The good news is they're already in the Lake Forest Plan, comprehensive plan, Lake Forest Park. This next graphic is key because it kind of describes what this 2-year periodic cumulative update is. It's not to look at individual items in the plan and update those, it's to look at it collectively. And the rings around the exhibit, the symbol, are the various layers. On the outside, you'll see the state level Growth Management Act. Examples of that in the last session would be House Bill 1110 around middle housing. And that's primarily the Department of Commerce and any new legislation that is mandated or that we're willing to take on. The next inner ring is Puget Sound Regional Council, a regional body primarily tasked with transportation. Their document that they updated a couple years back is called Vision 2050. New version of Vision 2040 contains things like the regional transportation plan, the regional economic plan. But I view it, to summarize it, as transportation. In the end, when the local jurisdiction adopts their comprehensive plan, go through a certification process at Puget Sound Regional Council, and the intent is for them to review and certify the transportation elements of our local plan. The ring inside of that is King County for us. It's the countywide planning policies. primary example of that would be the growth targets that you may have heard about over the last couple of years. And any other county level policies that have changed since our last comp plan was reviewed. The most important ring inside of that is local, the local character, what the community wants the vision, the mission, goals, and policies to be. And so at all those levels, you could view the outer rings as mandated and meeting those requirements. But the relook and the update really is for the community to take time to explore, is what is already in the plan working? Should it be taken out? Should it be added? Should we add new issues to it and give direction and carry out the plan in an additional 10 years? So there's the good news slide. With all the legislation, Commerce is very busy right now. A lot of mandates, a lot of issues, very broad, a lot of staff changes, and then COVID came. But the legislature realized that there is a lot of burden placed on local jurisdictions, especially the small ones that don't necessarily have a lot of staff or resources to fund this 2-year effort. So with those burdens in this round, they've fortunately provided grant opportunities for Lake Forest Park. Early opportunity was a 2 commerce fiscal year grant consisting of $62,500 for each fiscal year. So we're halfway through that. But to offset the periodic update, which is the grand look. In that, with new legislation, it became obvious the housing mandates were also a burden. And to offset that, they fortunately provided another grant, the middle housing grant, specific to policy development regulations to assist with implementing those mandates or beyond. And the city was fortunate and was granted that. Most recently, you heard the news from city administrator that the new mandates around climate element, more significant funding, and the city applied for that and was awarded the $500,000. So we're developing the interagency agreement, looking at the scope, putting that in place, and by doing that, moving the 2029 mandate forward. The portions that we can implement in this periodic update by the due date, December, we can do and start the studies, and then in advance, prepare this separate climate element with the sub elements and so forth in advance of 2029 with that funding. So that's in the process. And that'll help greatly with those the analysis and studies. So here's the important slide for tonight on where are we at. The good news is the green, we've made significant progress in a short period of time. It's still in draft form, but the Planning Commission has taken on strikeout, underline, review and comment of existing policies, suggestions, and they're incorporated into land use, environmental quality, and community services. They will stand as draft throughout this process until a recommendation is made, but they've moved the needle with those 3. In March and April, you'll see that a slightly larger burden is on the way. Transportation and housing are significant efforts, and they're coming. The Planning Commission has added 6 special meetings to the regular meetings to take on that workload, allow more discussion so that they could better inform SCJ, the consultant. Our hope is that in May and June, we're at a point where they can essentially say we have draft elements ready to go and start discussing or forming a recommendation. They're a recommending body. That entire record, all the material, all the draft, then comes to the city council for consideration, deliberation, amendment, and hopefully action. So that is a busy year. The due date under the Growth Management Act is December 31st. Not all jurisdictions are going to meet that. I would love for this jurisdiction to be one that does, but there's a lot of work to be done to get there. This slide with the prior topic, trees, is a good example. In January and February, unfortunately I'm new, but going to all of the committees, boards, and other groups to incorporate their comments or incorporate their suggestions into this draft plan is important. So the Planning Commission is including the Climate Action Committee, for instance, the tree board. At the tree board, a prime example is what tree policies are already in the comprehensive plan. So staff is going to work to identify those, come back to tree board, inform them, use this report and the conclusions to evaluate whether the existing policies are sufficient and are evidently working, should be bolstered, or add new action items. Another example would be the Climate Action Committee. I believe we're going March 5th and to incorporate the Climate Action Plan. So all of those are not intended to be the exhaustive list. If there's any input of any other group or entity that we should further reach out to, I'd love to hear it. More the better. One of the issues that came up with the Planning Commission is that words matter, and community character and the words that we use need to capture the vision and the mission, incorporate them into policy, because then it informs the development regulations and decisions later. So a lot of the draft language that you'll see when this is recommended and forwarded to you is intended to capture not only what is in Growth Management Act or the CPPs or the new legislation, but also be true to the local community. So those words matter, and they were wrestling with things like what is a goal versus a policy? What is a policy versus an action item? And then further clarifying that this comprehensive plan is policy, it is not development regulation. So within that, I wanted this context to exist, not to read it tonight, but to make it aware this is what the Planning Commission is struggling with. And when the recommendation is made, it's primarily seen as policies, not development regulations. That all comes to you. And then their mission then becomes start examining the existing development regulations and suggesting changes or amendments to implement the policy changes. Oddly, they're due at the same time, December, but there's more leeway. So we know we're not going to get through that. Critical areas ordinance is an example. Shoreline master program is another example. But we know that the housing, House Bill 1110 development regulations are a big effort. So they'll be concentrating on that while the city council is considering this comprehensive plan. And we'll see how far we get this year. So, and the climate grant scope, budget, and so forth is through June. I guess there's 31 days in June 31st, 2025. So it's going to be a pretty busy effort through that time period. So I'll leave it open to discussion and questions or direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hoffman. Excellent presentation. Colleagues, questions for Mark? Councilmember Reports.
Thank you. So climate is that the climate section is due by 2029, but we're going to tackle some of it right now. Do you know what the requirement is for what they want by 2029? And are we going to be doing like a portion of what they're asking for? Are we going to just try to do it? Where are we with that? Because I know you want to get some done in this update.
Being new here, I can characterize it. I would suggest that the results of the grant application meant everything. Now that we know that a week or two ago, we have an opportunity to not just do the 2024 requirements and then spend the next 4 or 5 years doing the mandate. We can change the scope, which we intend to do, move the portions forward so that we don't duplicate them later, do them this year, inform the periodic update, and get started. The way I characterize it at Planning Commission is let's do right now, do what we have to do, prepare, and then make it better, better, better. We don't need to wait. This periodic update is only one mechanism to update the comprehensive plan. Annually, you could do it as a group, a collection. And I imagine that if the decision's made to make a standalone climate and resilience element or incorporate those into the existing elements, once that's made, we can go down that road. Whether that's in 2025 or 2026 as a docketed group, we have that ability.
Thank you. And another timeline question, with the middle housing grant, do you feel that we're going to be on target for meeting the deadline for updating our land use code? I think that was by
Yeah, important question.
June 25 or something like that.
Yeah, Department of Commerce has developed a model ordinance. This legislation is a little different than most. And I won't call it a penalty, but the result. Cities are mandated to adopt their local specific development regulations by June 2025 or be subject to the model ordinance, so that we know how the detail and how it plays out and how we meet it locally and achieve that. I'm not certain yet, but we need to do that. So that deadline's looming. I'll summarize it in my professional opinion. We do not want to be subject to the model ordinance.
I agree.
Lake Forest Park is has different constraints.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Colleagues. Questions, Mr. Lebo, do you have any questions? Start with you first.
No, I don't, other than to express appreciation for the work that is going on. And I also appreciate sought out the grant for the climate changes and resilience, and glad to see that that's being incorporated to the extent possible in this comprehensive plan update. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Furtani, and then Councilmember Goldman.
And thank you, Director Hoffman, for a succinct report. So I noticed on the community outreach and groups, are each of these groups coming to the Planning Commission to talk to the Planning Commission about how their particular expertise fits into the larger report? Or are you expecting written reports from these other bodies?
Not written, not formal, and a combination of both. Some have. Sarah has come on behalf of the climate action. Everyone is invited. It's a very public process. So even if you're not in a group and you're just a concerned citizen, or you just want to know what's happening, you're invited. So it's meant to be inclusive that way. Some of these groups don't have the time or the availability to come to Planning Commission and participate. The meetings are only a couple hours long. And so we're making attempts to go out to them and at least make them aware. They may not have comment or suggestions, but at least they'll be aware. An example of that was Tuesday night at the Stewardship Foundation, making sure it was on their radar so that they're aware, and then assisting or facilitating them participating.
Thanks for putting my mind at ease. I was just imagining a traffic jam of people coming in to the meeting and trying to say their piece in a few minutes, but this is a much more sensible method. And please convey my thanks to the Planning Commission for accommodating everyone.
Thank you.
Councilmember Goldman.
Yep, thanks for the report. I don't have any specific questions, just a few comments. Sorry. First, give my thanks to the Planning Commission. I looked at their schedule for all the special meetings they've added, and for a volunteer commission, they're doing a lot of extra work. So give my thanks to them for that. Also looking at the schedule, it looks like we're hitting pretty much all of the optional components, which is good. I think our comprehensive plan should be as comprehensive as possible. And in terms of climate, we got that $500,000 grant, which is awesome. I say let's go big and let's do as much as we can this year and next year. I'm excited to see what climate goals we can put in our comp plan, and then get the climate action plan and see, let's get that integrated as well. So the more that we can do this year and next year, the better, rather than waiting for 2029.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Good or Deputy Mayor Bodie?
I agree.
Deputy Mayor Bodie, excuse me.
I just wanted to say that the extra meetings that the Planning Commission has set to be able to meet the schedule and the complexity of work that they're dealing with because of the new mandates is just so impressive. And like Councilmember Goldman, I want to say I really appreciate it, because this is really stepping up for a volunteer effort. It's really, really impressive. So, and of course, it's more of your time too, also. So appreciate both the planning commission's extra effort and the extra time that you'll be taking on it too. So it's, I'm looking forward to, seeing the results. I see that the council has some heavy lifting from summer to December 31st. We might be having some late December meetings that we usually try to avoid. So
It's not like we have a budget to do either. So.
anyway, thank you very much.
That's
Thank you.
Riddle.
And one comment in that regard, staff will strive to update you as much as possible. All the material will be on the website and broadcast and available in the packets and so forth. So if in your spare time, feel free not to wait till June. But as a body, we'll bring it to you as a formal recommendation and then really formally start with the council then.
I would say that's a good point. There are red line markups already available if you're interested in seeing the land use policies, for example.
And this is legislative. This is policy legislative.
Right.
Councilmember Riddle.
In the same vein, so I was on planning commission during the last update, and yes, there are extra meetings. And so my thanks to the planning commission and to staff for taking on the extra burden throughout the summer. We did back then, I think possibly one, maybe two joint meetings with council to kind of become in alignment before handing over the final red line report. So there was kind of a warm handoff. I don't know if this planning commission has discussed doing something similar, but I think that was useful for council to kind of be able to ask questions of the planning commissioners before the report was handed over to really give us the context and background of what they were thinking. So if that's another meeting that you can shoehorn into the schedule, it might be useful. So please consider that.
At least in the meetings that I've been at, that has not been discussed. We've discussed other elements that are coming, like a community survey, you know, finalizing the steps that we need to take with the participation plan, getting through the elements. But when those discussions happen, whether we call it a workshop or whatever the opportunity is, that's a great suggestion.
Deputy Mayor Bodie.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Riddle, because that made me think about the town center code. And so in that case, the planning commission actually held a public hearing on their recommendations before they were provided to council. And I think that was helpful to bring the community along before it was kind of a done deal in terms of their final recommendations. And I believe they may have made a few changes here and there. And then, of course, the council then came to the recommendations with that input from the public hearing. So I would flag the fact that when there's and it depends, I think because of the new elements, whether it's climate or housing, or even how transportation is handled, environmental quality, actually all the issues. We could see at the point of the recommendations, a lot of community interest. And so that might be useful to consider. I realize the schedule's tight, but I do think that in the case of the town center amendments, which were controversial, that was very helpful in smoothing the path.
Excellent point. I'm sorry, did I miss someone else? Was there anybody else waiting? Any other questions for Director Hoffman? Well, I know we're going to have lots of future conversations. I guess hearing no other questions. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. With that, we're moving on to the consent calendar. I'd entertain a motion for adoption.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or any items that need to be removed from the consent calendar? Hearing no further discussion. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Councilor Proton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just wanted to, I don't want to pull anything from the consent calendar, but I wanted to thank the 4 folks who re-upped with their city committees. Really appreciate basically the hard work you're putting in and all the volunteer time. So just I figured that should be acknowledged.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Furtani. That is really important to recognize. These folks have already put in an enormous amount of work and they're willing to continue doing it. And many thanks to them for serving our community. It's invaluable institutional knowledge and professional experience that they have that they bring to the table. Any other comments, Council? All those in favor of adoption of the consent calendar signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any nays? The ayes have it. Thank you, Council. Consent calendar passes unanimously. We do not have any, let's see, ordinances or resolution for action tonight, and we do not have any discussion and action. Is there any other business, Council? Make sure I'm checking with Mr. Lebo here. Doing a 270-degree rotation here, make sure I don't miss anyone. Okay, with that, we're moving on to council committee reports. What's your pleasure? You want to have any council committee reports to share? Mr. Lebo, did you want to talk about BNF? Budget and finance? Sorry, come on. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, my friend.
Gosh, I was thinking about the railroad BNSF. Track is on my mind. No, I just wanted to offer that we did look at the dashboard for, I think it was the end of last year. And I think though, because this is a budget year, it will be valuable for us as the city develops the call it the dashboards for the forecast for where we're going. We saw some of the revenue and we saw some of the expenditures, and so it'll be very helpful. And I know the team is working on it, but I think for the council members to be able to see what we think of as the end of year forecast and how we're doing. I think it's going to be a challenging year for all of us on the budget side.
Thank you, John. With that, any other committee reports? I don't think so. We didn't have a committee of the whole because of the holiday. We'll move on to council member reports. I think Vice Chair Johnny has his hand sort of half up. Ready? Go to it, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so I just have a quick report from the K4C Outreach Committee. Many things didn't make it past the legislative session. The RERAP Act didn't make it. Community solar didn't make it. The small gas engines phasing out didn't make it. So I think the things that are still alive are the Puget Sound Energy gas decarbonization bill, as well as zero emission school buses. I think those two may have a significant impact on us. Point is that I think the legislative session ends on March 7th. So if you're interested in any of these things, you know who to reach out to.
Thank you, Vice Chair Furtani. Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, first I'll mention also at our previous meeting, former Councilmember Phillips mentioned a bill about energy audits, and that bill is also still alive.
Okay.
For me, earlier this week, I attended a seminar by MSRC about surplus property for affordable housing. There were representatives from Bellingham and Spokane who talked about their experiences and what other jurisdictions could learn from. So some of the key takeaways, I think we're a little bit ahead of the game in that we already have our ordinance about allowing us to dispose of surplus property. From the city, some of the other things they came up with, one of their next steps were to do an inventory of all the property they owned. And that way then for staff to come up with some guidelines for whether it was critical, whether it was surplus. And then once those cities had a list of all their surplus property, then they can start getting into, well, do we want to sell it at market value? Do we want to sell it at the assessed value? Do we want to give it away? And what sort of restrictions do they want, like in terms of affordable housing, what income levels, finding partners? But the first steps were to have an ordinance that allows them to give it away and then to work with staff to do an inventory. And they also mentioned it was important for staff to be empowered to come up with creative ideas for property that at first glance might not have been, we might not have thought it was feasible, but if creatively there were other uses for it. So making sure that staff felt empowered for that.
Thank you, Council Member. Any other Deputy Mayor Bodie?
Yes, I attended the Sound Cities Policy Issues Committee meeting, and it was the first meeting with the new representative, so it was a whole new slate of people. And we did get a legislative update from AWC, so they did kind of cover some of what my colleagues here have covered in terms of what was still alive and what was not alive anymore. They also talked about the citizen initiatives that and because the legislature has to decide how to handle those, they can adopt, somewhat modify, put it to the vote of the people. There's a variety of options. So it's possible that some of that has sorted out since the meeting, but I have not followed it. There was a lot of discussion about the Regional Homelessness Authority. There's a lot of concern about money being put in versus services being provided and proportionality, so that all cities that are contributing are getting services from the Homelessness Authority. There was a view expressed by some cities that King County puts in money into the Regional Homelessness Authority. Therefore, because King County gets revenue that comes from the cities, that we shouldn't have to put extra money in from our city budgets to get proportionate services. And so there's just, especially from the small and medium cities, just a lot of consternation about the lack of services. And the new mayor of Gouin, who has worked with homelessness issues as part of his career, actually expressed a lot of concern about making sure that there's proportionate distribution and good value for the money, because I guess they were feeling left out. But there was a lot of similar expression. But anyway, they're looking for ways to revitalize the Policy Issues Committee. Their feeling was that it's just gotten a little bit in need of invigorating. So there's some work groups working on that. That's it for me.
That's where we're.
We had the North King County Coalition on Homelessness last week. And the kind of the highlights for that was the King County Regional Homeless Authority did a point in time count. And they're doing two different point in time counts. One is a sheltered count and one is unsheltered count. The sampling that they did for the unsheltered individuals concluded on February 2nd, and they had for just the North King County hub where folks could bring all this information together, over 1,300 interviews. So this was really trying to be less of a head count and more of like an information gathering, like where was your last city you were sheltered in and things like that. So they were more of an interview based. And then, so a full report will be coming out in the spring based off of that count. And then they're going to do this for the sheltered count will end here, probably already ended early February. So that report will be coming out as well later. So that's a count of those who are in, temporary shelters right now. So that is useful. There's also going to be an annual North King County report coming from KCRHA, should be presented somewhere in March, April. It depends on how quickly they can kind of wrap that around, but that'll be a reflection of the work for the North King County cities. We'll get a report out for our funding for that. So expect that in a month or two. And they do have a new interim CEO now. So yet again, I guess Eldero Powell, I believe. And then NUSA did have our retreat. So there's a lot of conversation going on about how we move forward throughout the year. I think it was the first board retreat where we've had specific city representatives, because before council members would be on as community representatives, but now they've kind of got a more formalized city representatives. And so they have a representative from every city within the NUSA catch basin. So that was really great that the cities are coming together and actually appointing people to the board. We did see some general themes come out of it. Housing obviously is a big one. opioids, all the basic stuff that we're seeing. So hopefully we'll have a more refined direction here in the next meeting or two. But it was a wonderful opportunity for us to bring all the different cities' perspectives together in a room with the providers and other just community folks to really come together and say, what are we seeing and where might we have an impact? Misinformation was another thing that came up many times, is how do we address misinformation within our community? So I think those are the two that you haven't heard from me since our last meeting.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other Councilmember reports? Yes,
Councilmember Riddle, I just wanted to say that at the Sound Cities meeting also, there's a lot of concern about the survey. A number of council members and mayors had participated in past years and recently, and they really like the old survey, and the new survey mechanism is something that they think is not so accurate, and they especially don't like the non-treatment of addiction as either a contributing cause or a direct cause. So I was unfamiliar with it, but it was a heated discussion. So, and one last thing, we had great turnout for the workshop for the Lakefront Park, and the online survey is still available and open, and we've had great participation in that, and it was some of you have heard me say this. It was great to see a heavily attended Lake Forest Park meeting where people weren't mad.
Okay, thank you. Councilmembers, any other councilmember reports, thoughts?
I just noticed I had one other thing.
Go ahead.
Kudos to the North King County when we did the point in time count. Our hub was the most attended. It was open the latest and it had the most volunteers. So we really stepped up here.
Great.
Anyways, just want to shout out
That's awesome.
to us.
Well, I'll make it brief. Just a couple of things. I attended the North End Mayor's meeting, as well as a Strong Mayor's meeting. Both those meetings last week, this week and last week, thematically, everybody's talking about the comp plan, concerned about deadlines. And then, of course, another big concern is the legislative session. There seems to be a lot of frustration about not specifically the legislation and the spirit of the legislation, but the revenue implications or the lack of funding for new programs from the legislature. So that's a common theme. And I know we're all pushing very hard to make sure that any new programs that come down the pike are funded fully, and that we don't lose revenues, because there are some situations where we might lose from revenues. We're watching closely. As a matter of fact, a couple of us are watching that most of the afternoon today. I've got a couple of meetings coming up here in the very near future with newly appointed Sound Transit Board member Angela Burney, talking about a variety of different topics, both on Sound Transit, but also about city issues that we share with Redmond. And we also have a meeting coming up with new CEO Sparman, interim Sparman from Sound Transit here next month. One last thing, I'd just like to end on a positive note too, not that this all was not positive. Something happened for the first time in 50 years. The United States actually got a lander on the moon. It's weak, but it's survived. Odysseus is beeping. And you know, if anybody was watching the feed, the poor flight director finally came back online, and he quoted Monty Python and he said, "I'm not dead yet." So I thought that was brilliant. We'll see what happens from there. But I as a fan of the space program, growing up with a space program, I'm absolutely thrilled. It's really amazing work that they're all doing, private companies are doing, but other countries as well. That city administrator's report, Mr. Hill.
I just have one more bit of good news. The city again received the Well City Award from AWC. That saves us about 2% on our health insurance
Yay.
costs every year. And we always bank on that when we put our budget together. So thanks to all the staff who participated, we have to get, it's not a high bar, but you have to get over 50%. I think we were over 70% participation for the year, but I stand for any questions if you have any tonight. Otherwise, thank you.
Any questions for Administrator Hill? Right. Was there anything else for the good of the order, colleagues? Mr. Lebo, anything to share? Okay. I think with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Let's see.
Yeah. I think-
Yes, that's-